What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Babbles Nonsense podcast. We have Coach Keri back today to help us talk about the menstrual cycle, the phases of it, birth control, infertility, basal body temperature, signs and symptoms during your cycle, cycle syncing, hormones, testing, all the things. If you are a female and you are interested in this topic, or even if you're a male and you want to learn more about it, stick around. This episode is definitely for you. All right, guys, welcome back. We have Keri back here today, also known as Coach Keri. She is my personal trainer and nutritionist, but she also specializes in like gut health and loves talking about the menstrual cycle for women. So I wanted to have her back on so we can talk hormones, menstrual cycles, all the things related to that. So, guys, this episode may not be for you. Ladies, stick around to find some stuff out. But hey, guys may want to know too, just so that they can learn about the experience for their wife or spouse or girlfriend, sister, mother, whoever. I don't know.
Yeah,
So
100%.
welcome back, Keri.
Hi, hello. 100% though, like coming off the spouse conversation, I think especially like once you guys hear some of these notes that I have here for you, it makes a lot of sense because our periods are our fifth vital sign, and it's not something that's talked about enough because it really does play into like the energy that we have and the sexual desire that we have. And it does make a lot of sense when it comes to like partners. I know when I started getting a little bit more in tune with my cycle, I've been able to like share with my husband kind of like why I'm feeling what I'm feeling. And it not only like helps me not feel so crazy, but it works in his favor as well, you know? So it's always nice to have some notes.
Right. And I love the fact that you said that it's not talked about as much because it's really not. Like, I feel like even me being almost a 37-year-old woman,
Yeah.
I don't know as much as I should. And I'm in healthcare.
Yeah.
So it's not taught. Number one, it's not taught in school. You're taught like, oh, you got your period that
Yeah.
comes every 30 days. If you don't
Yeah.
have it, you're pregnant. That's about all the talk we as little girls get.
That's all we get. And, there's so much information out there now that would have been really nice to have when I was a kid. And I know we're going to get to this conversation, but I was somebody that was thrown on birth control when I was 15, and I really didn't know what it was
Same.
doing. And I know a lot of women are like that. And I work with a lot of clients that have the same story. And a lot of people do come to me now and they're like, I want to get off birth control. And it's an uncomfortable conversation because you start seeing people on the internet talking about how harmful it is to our bodies, and we're like, wait, like our like doctor, like my pediatrician put me on it. Like I was in a pediatrician office when I went
Yeah.
off control when I was 15 still. So yeah, it's definitely a lot of new information out there. And when you say like, just even like doctors aren't talking about it, and it's what I want to make known. It's not that they are keeping information from us. It's just they weren't really taught about it either. I can't
Right.
tell you how many coach friends that I have that I've worked with people in healthcare, doctors included, and they've been like, whoa, like I've never learned this stuff.
Right. And so that's something else. Like even OBGYNs, I'm not
Yeah.
saying like that they don't know, but they do not specialize in hormone therapy. So
Yeah.
like I even have talked to one of my OBs when my hormones started going all kinds of crazy at like age 29, 30.
Yeah.
And he was like, "Oh, you don't need hormones. You're fine." And I was just like,
And they
"I'm
brush you off.
30." I
They
was
brush
like,
you off, and I know you know this. It's impossible to get some of this stuff tested.
"It
And
is."
that's the hard part. Cause like I sound like an alien when I'm talking to clients about it. Whereas I'm like, yeah, well, like, I want you to get this looked at, but you're probably not going to be able to get it through your doctor. And it's like, what? Like,
Right.
this is hard. But hopefully, like, over the next couple of years, as all this stuff evolves, I think women are getting smarter. Not that I know women are getting smarter. We're learning how to advocate for ourselves a little bit better too, which is great. Go us. But hopefully, over the next like generation, we start to see some of this stuff be more readily available. We don't have to jump through hoops. Especially like in the fertility space, I see so many women struggle with this, and just like common information that I'm like, oh my God. And I'm in so many groups when it comes to fertility now. And it's just like, wow, like we're really left in the dark with so many things and like so many easy things what we can do. And I know that you mentioned like I'm a nutrition and fitness coach. Yes, like I do take an interest in hormones, but so many things can be helped just through lifestyle.
Mhm.
And yeah, like it all kind of comes like together. But when I see people in these Facebook groups that are talking about they have these issues with like getting pregnant and like I'm like I could help you, like which is such simple things, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah, that's like
Well, when we get to the infertility talk, I'll tell you my
yeah.
theory. I got to write myself a note because I'll forget because
No, I'm here for it.
thyroid brain.
I love a good theory. I really, really do, especially with these conversations, because
I
yeah,
have a
once you start
theory, but
going down,
who knows if it's accurate or not, but it's just a theory. So
yeah,
I
once
want
you start going down these rabbit holes, it's hard to stop. And
it
me and you
is.
talk about this often. Like it
Yeah.
is a big rabbit hole to go down.
All right, so let's just kind of start basic from the beginnings
Yeah,
because even so like it took me a long time to even understand like the phases of a menstrual cycle. So
yeah,
kind of describe or tell us number one the phases of the menstrual cycle and kind of what
yeah.
each one does and the length and things like that.
Yeah, 100%. So I want you to think about it as a circle with me. I know most of you, I think all of you guys were not recording this visually. So think about it as like a circle. And I want you to think about it as four phases of this circle. So we have our bleed phase. And I'm going to go through all four, what they are, and then I'll give you a little bit of like signs and symptoms, what they come with. I think it's the easiest. So bleed phase is kind of like where it's going to start. Cycle day one is considered the first day of full bleed on your period. We all know what that is. Most of us know what that is if you're not a male, you know. So we have your bleed phase. That's going to be phase number one. Phase number two is going to be your follicular phase. Then after your follicular phase, that's going to follow your ovulation phase. And then behind that's going to be your luteal phase. And again, like the first time you hear this, you're like, oh, this is a lot. This seems like a lot. But I promise it's going to start to make sense when you think about yourself and your own cycle. When I think to clients and when I have this conversation with clients, I can determine how they're feeling. Like if I get a check-in and they're like, "Oh, I was like super tired this week. I don't know why. I was super snacky this week. I don't know why. I had so much energy this week. I don't know why this was different." And I'm like, "Girl." And I ask, and you know, I ask when was the last day of your first period, and I use that a lot when somebody comes into coaching. I use that a lot. Like I get to know your cycle, and I'm like, "Ooh, like your cycle was 2 weeks ago." That kind of puts you closer to ovulation, and this could bring this thoughts and feelings, and it starts to make a lot of sense. So when it comes to your bleed phase, which is considered your period, again, this is going to be your cycle day one. That's going to be the first day to your period to the last. And when I talk about day numbers, I know that you want to know like cycle lengths. I'm going to be talking about the woman with like the typical 28-day cycle. That's like pretty much what I see with a lot of women. Not to say that like if you're not at 28 days that you're not normal, but this is going to be kind of based off of a 28-day cycle since like that's where most women
It's
are on
most common,
average.
yeah.
Yes. So that's going to be between days like 1 to 5 for most. I see most with like the healthiest cycle, it's going to be between like 2 to 5 days. Hormones are at their lowest in their period. So it's always really funny when people say like, oh, I'm so hormonal when they're on their period, because your hormones are actually at their lowest when you're on your period. And when you kind of hear that, it's like, oh crap. But there's a reason why you feel crappy because it's because your hormones are at your lowest. People say like, "Oh, I'm so hormonal," when you're actually not hormonal. Hormones are at their lowest, but that does
Yeah.
bring its own like thoughts and feelings. When it comes to working out, this isn't the time to set like personal records or do a ton of like endurance based workouts. If you guys know anything about me, I'm like heavy into weightlifting, heavy into strength training. I'm not like running marathons or anything like that, but I do have clients that are into it. When they're on their period, that's not going to be a time that I'm going to go tell them to like run a marathon, you know? With your period, that could be things like cramps, that could have headaches, you could have lower energy. And again, like once you understand what's happening when you have your period, it starts to make sense. Like your uterine lining is shedding. So it makes sense that you have some cramps, you have lower energy, like you're losing literal blood from your body. So it makes sense that we're a little bit on the lower end when it comes to energy. Now, our follicular phase, this is after we stop with our period. Some are actually going to consider your follicular phase the same, starting around the same time of your period, but I'm going to consider it when the bleeding stops. So after bleeding stops, this goes on for about 4 days, your follicular phase. So it's a great phase to be in, but it's also super short. And it's covering usually, again, for the woman with a 28-day cycle, is going to be days like 6 to 10. And again, like if your cycles are a little bit longer, it's going to be pushed back a little bit, and vice versa with if they were a little bit shorter. So this is The time, sometimes you're feeling you still have like some fatigue, you can still have headaches here, but this is usually when I start to feel that most people are becoming more positive. They're getting a little bit more motivated. When it comes to cervical fluid, I'm somebody that talks about cervical fluid a lot. Again, men, hopefully you're not here. Um, you can tell a lot about where you are in your cycle about the lack of cervical fluid or like what the cervical fluid's actually looking like. So when it comes to cervical fluid here, you may realize that it's like dry, it might be clumpy, it might be white. But when we step into ovulation, that's when I'm like really looking into the cervical fluid. But as far as ovulation goes, ovulation happens in a single moment. And that's what most women do not understand. And it took me a while to understand that ovulation is happening in a very, very short window, but we can consider this a 3 to 4 day window, our ovulation, because we can get pregnant up to like 3 to 6 days out of the month when it comes to ovulation. But again, ovulation is a very quick moment in time. It's like a second and then it's over, but most we're going to consider it for the most part like a 3 to 4 day window. Before we are ovulating, our hormones, estrogen and testosterone, are at the highest. So, this is why we feel when it comes to testosterone, this is why we feel like our sexiest, our strongest. We have more libido here. I know that you want to ask me a little bit about libido, and the best time where this is going to be the highest is ovulation. And that starts to make sense, right?
Yeah,
Because
because you want to
when a
produce.
woman,
Yeah.
yes, that's when a woman can reproduce and have a baby if that's the goal. And yeah, there's a reason for that. And that's when we're going to be feeling the best. When it comes to cervical fluid, this is going to be like clear, stretchy, like a slip and slide's the best way that I've ever heard it determined, and we're all ladies here. If you know
Yeah.
exactly what that is. That's going to be considered when we're the most fertile. And again, it's like a quick moment in time, but we can get pregnant days leading up to ovulation. And we can talk about like how we can track ovulation in a second too. But as far as ovulation goes, like when it comes to like sign and symptoms, we have more energy here for sure, more libido, and a higher BBT. When I say BBT, this is going to be your basal body temperature. That's going to be a little bit higher when you're ovulating, and that has to do with the progesterone starting to rise. Symptoms here can be like in the aside from the cervical fluid, which is a really good marker of fertility. I have people ask me like, how accurate is it? And from what I've heard, it's like up to 98% accurate if you can catch it. So it's very accurate.
Yeah.
But when you are ovulating, and not everybody reports this to be the same for every woman, but this is something that I do experience, is I do get crampy when I'm ovulating. Like I can feel it on a certain side, which is funny. And it starts to make sense because we're releasing an egg from either the left or the right side. If you're somebody that's able to release eggs from both sides, some people are only able to release an egg from one side, depending on how that's looking. But you start to get that pain when you're ovulating. And it's
Isn't that called
called,
something?
yeah, Mitchell-Smithers.
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it, Mitchell-Smithers, but yes, that is exactly what it's called. And that's kind of where I was going with that. And it could be like a little bit of annoying. It could be a little bit like irritation. But I know for me, like once I started really getting into cycle tracking, I'm like, so that makes sense why I
Hmm.
get like crampy. And honestly, like my ovulation cramps were a little bit more prominent than my period cramps.
Hmm.
Uh, so I always like knew when I was ovulating. And I do have plenty of clients that tell me like, yeah, I know when I'm ovulating. Like I know, and that's like really clear. And like that's awesome that you do know. Yeah, so that's ovulation. Ovulation's a great time, but it's a very short time. And your luteal phase, the best way I like to explain it, it's like that downward slope. And unfortunately, it's the longest phase. It does happen right after ovulation. As soon as ovulation's done, you're stepping right into that luteal phase. I like to think of it as like the late phase, like luteal is late. So it's like the later phase in the month right before you're about to get your period. Again, that's always how I've remembered it. But it's characterized by a drop in estrogen and testosterone and the increase in progesterone. So when your progesterone's on the rise throughout the month, everything else is on like that downward slump. So we start to feel a little bit crappier throughout the rest of the month. And your body's preparing to start shedding that lining. So we start to feel like we could feel a little bit more crampier, especially like a week out before the period. Your hormones are starting to slowly decrease. So the PMS symptoms here are starting. A lot of the times I hear with clients, they get their worst symptoms like the week leading up to your period. And it
Same.
totally
Yeah.
does make sense. Like you start to feel a little bit hungrier. And that makes a lot of sense because our metabolism's starting to work a little bit harder in that luteal phase. We're actually burning, I hear numbers all over the map. I hear between like 100 to 300. I hear between 100 to 500. The most accurate number I've heard is 340. So that's like, I run with that one. And I'm like, I think it's like around 340 calories. You're burning more calories. That's what I want you to take from that conversation. Your metabolism is working a little bit harder in your luteal phase. And so many people, and this is like around the board when it comes to clients, they're like, I'm so hungry. And it makes sense. Like it
I do
does.
that to you on my check-ins. I'm like, I was
Yeah.
so hungry and snacked all week, and you were
Yeah.
like, have you tracked your cycle? And I'm like, you tell me to do that. I need to be better at it.
It makes like, if anything, and this is like where we can go with this conversation, it makes you feel better to kind of know these
Yeah.
things like, oh, that makes sense. And I always say, I unlocked my truest potential when I started tracking my cycle because now I know in my luteal phase, I'm not crazy. I'm just in my luteal phase. Like I have less energy. I'm a little bit crampier. I do get irritated easily. I want to be by myself a lot more. And it all makes sense because it makes sense where we are with our hormone production.
Yeah.
When it comes to my follicular phase, I'm feeling a little bit more social and like up to do things. And when I'm ovulating, I'm like ready to set PRs in the gym and like it's great. So if you're able to track where you are in your cycle, it makes a lot of sense. So if you're starting to feel down on yourself, chances are you're in that luteal phase. And that's usually what I can catch for most people. And a lot of the times women are like, we don't know why we're like this. Like I felt so confident last week. And this week I feel like a bag of biscuits.
And we do
And
feel crazy.
yeah, and it makes you feel crazy, but like, no, it actually really does make sense. And it sounds super woo-woo, but it really does make sense when
Well,
it
and if
comes
men
to,
are listening, then that's a good thing for them to know because sometimes men are like, God, you're just being so crazy right now. But like,
yeah,
if they could understand the cycle as well, it's like sometimes it is out of our control and not to use that as an excuse because
yeah,
we should be able to control it a little bit, but sometimes you just can't. Like,
yeah.
sometimes, like, you're crying at a movie and you have no idea why,
Yes,
you
yes,
know?
100%. And as a woman, if you're somebody that likes data, you're like, okay, that makes a lot of sense, you know?
Yeah.
And like I see people use this in all different ways. Like I see people use this when it comes to fitness, and I know we'll chat a little bit about that, but I also see people use this in like the professional world. Like if you want to have a really good conversation, like on a podcast, like you and I are doing, maybe set that up for your follicular or ovulation phase because
I
the
didn't even think about
conversation
that.
yeah, yeah, like it does make a lot of sense to start scheduling your things. And I actually have mentors that do schedule their like in-person speaking events and the podcast that they're on around where they are in their cycle. And like it sounds like, well, that sounds like a little crazy, but if you can do it, freaking work it, you know?
Now that you said that, like, there are sometimes, like, and I have mentioned this on podcasts and like with my life coach and stuff, I'll be like,
Yeah,
sometimes, like, I love podcasting, I enjoy it so much,
yeah,
but then there's those days where I'm like,
yeah.
I don't want to do this. I don't want to do.
Yes.
Why did I schedule this? I don't want to do it. I have no motivation, and I need to start tracking where I'm at to see.
100%. I agree. And like I'm a regular podcast listener to a few different people. And it's funny because I listen to one in particular, and she often is like, I just don't want to do this today. And I'm like, I wonder if she is in her cycle. She does, I don't think she does track her cycle. And I'm like, I would be curious to kind of know. Cause like sometimes she sounds like super fun and super like engaged. And then other times it's kind of like, I feel like crap. And she's honest about that. And
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like, and like she will throw comments of like, I'm about to get my period. And it's like, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm not saying like you shouldn't be podcasting, but like
yeah,
you want to have a lot of energy and some like good conversation. Maybe you try it, And again,
yeah.
it sound woo-woo, but it's something to try and you can't really knock it until you try it.
Well, I mean, you know that all of this is real when you realize that people who do experiments like on fitness and nutrition when it comes to weight
Yeah.
loss and stuff like that, they
Yes.
don't use women
Yes.
because they can't get it's more skewed than it is if they can use someone who has normal hormones all month.
And it's so funny that you say that because we can get on another rabbit hole with this conversation. But when it comes to like blood work, when it comes to like reference ranges, they don't use women in those things. Like we're
Oh,
basically
really?
No, like it's based off of men and it's usually based off of sick individuals. So we're basing
I
our
knew
like,
the sick ones, but I thought it was a
yeah.
range of men and women.
I mean, from my understanding, it's like men and like sick individuals,
I knew it
which
was
is
sick individuals.
which is crazy because it's like, okay, we're using these like broad numbers, number one. But yeah, from my understanding, it's predominantly men. And that kind of sucks when you're a woman and you're like, I feel crazy. And they're like, oh, it's normal. And it's like, yeah,
But then no one tells you why. It's like kind of just brush it off. Don't talk about it. Let's be, let's like in, in junior high when you got your period, like
yep.
you had to hide the tampon and run to the
Mhm.
bathroom and like no
Yeah.
one was supposed to know that you're on your cycle. But
Yes.
now it's kind of just like, you know what? I can't help it. Like
No.
it's coming anyways. Like I cannot help it. Like get over it. If you have
Yeah.
some kind of insecurity about me being on my menstrual cycle, that's
Yeah.
on you.
And like I said, it's your fifth vital sign. Like it's a sign that everything is operating normally. If you're getting a normal cycle, it's coming around the same time every month, it's a good color, that's a good thing and that's a good sign and you want that, and I know so many women who have lost their periods and
Hmm.
that's awful, like it's hard to get that back, but if you're losing your period there's a big underlying issue going on for why that's happening, and like some women, then this is another rabbit hole, like I posted about this a couple of weeks ago and people were kind of crazy, like some of my friends in this space, I don't know if you commented, there's like a pill now that will delay your period.
I saw you posted. I did not comment. That's a good conversation for this podcast. I'm like, well, I've not seen that.
So I really don't know much about it. So like I really can't like talk too much crap, but all I know is it delays your period and people they advertise it as like for your honeymoon, for your wedding. And
So it's
that's
essentially strong birth control,
yes, essentially. And
essentially.
it's pushing off your cycle. And maybe that sounds great. Like I think like maybe years ago, I'd be like, oh, that's awesome. Like that sounds great. Like, but knowing what I know now,
Right.
getting a normal period is a sign that your body's operating correctly. So to delay that process is kind of bizarre to me,
Well, since we're already on that topic, let's kind of dive into that next. So, you mentioned you got put on birth control at 15. I got put on
Yeah.
birth control at 15
Yeah.
because I started having heavy periods, cramping, which is
Yes.
normal for a
Yeah.
15-year-old when your hormones are trying to regulate themselves.
Correct. Yes.
But I got put on, so I think I was on birth control from age 15 to 27, 28.
Yeah. That's kind of my timeline. I was 15 to probably 26.
And so
Yeah.
when I came off of it, I lost my period for 6 months, went to the
Yep.
OBGYN. He was like, this is pretty common if you come
Mhm.
off birth control. And then they gave me, I don't remember, I think it was progesterone to restart my cycle,
Mhm.
which was like the worst period of my life.
Yeah, I believe that.
And then after that, like developed all my thyroid issues. Well, I was kind of going through the thyroid issues at the same time, but then my symptoms came back because they're kind of similar, I guess.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Well, your thyroid looks good. Let's check your hormones." My testosterone, my estrogen, and progesterone were all zero, undetectable on blood work.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. Like, I mean,
Right,
and that's the thing. Like, once you learn about it, it makes a lot of sense. But we didn't really think anything about it. It wasn't until I
right.
started taking courses and learning more from my clients' behalf. And I say this often, I was dealing with a lot of underlying issues when I came off of birth control. I came off of birth control cold turkey. I really didn't think anything of
Same.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah, like, and when I clients tell me this often, they come in, they're like, yeah, I called my doctor and he just said to stop after my last pill. And I'm like, I don't love that.
yeah.
I don't love that. Especially like you were just on something for years. And we have to understand like what it's actually doing to the body. Birth control is turning off your ovulation. That
with
right there.
with synthetic hormones. So basically, you
Correct.
then no longer produce your own estrogen and progesterone, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So it depends what birth control you're on, and there's a couple of different. There's like the combination pill. There's the hormonal IUD. There's the copper IUD. There's the mini pill. There's the I said the mini pill. There's the arm insert, the depot shot. There's the ring. There's so many different forms. They're all like a lot of them are doing the same things, but essentially, it's either a combination of synthetic estrogen and progesterone or one or the other. So the combination pill is going to be estrogen and progesterone. So it's producing synthetic estrogen and progesterone for you. You're not producing it by yourself. So it's not like an on off switch. When you turn it off, no matter how long you're turning it off for, it doesn't just automatically turn on. So imagine the person that's doing this for years, like somebody like you and I, we were on it for 10 years. It's not just like an on off switch. So when I came off at first, I remember just being like, I'm done this pack. I'm not going to pick up my next pack. I was with my husband. We weren't married at the time, but we were engaged. So I knew I was going to be with him for the rest of my life. I'm like, whatever happens, it kind of happens. And I was done. I was just done with it. I was like, I'm taking it for 10 years. I don't even know how I'm on it without it. I've always been somebody that had higher anxiety. And I was like, I wonder if they're kind of connected. Like, like I really wasn't thinking anything of it. I thought it was a good idea. I'm like, it's probably a good idea to come off of it. I don't know. Like, when we want to start having kids, like I have no clue, but like it's probably a good idea to give myself some time without it. So I just came off of it cold turkey and it felt great. Like I remember all of a sudden I was like, oh, I have all this energy. I have like less anxiety. And I don't know if it was like a placebo effect or what, but 6 months to a year later, I would say like roughly like 9 months exactly, that's when I started realizing like, oh, I'm like packing on weight. I was really packing on weight. My acne, I've never had acne. I had the most beautiful skin when I was on birth control, which it makes a lot of sense. Um, I had cystic acne out of nowhere. And I was so embarrassed by it. I would like take pictures of it every day. And like I still have them on my phone. And I'm like, holy God, I can't believe my face ever looked like that. Cannot believe it. I remember when we just moved, we moved from Philadelphia to Florida about 2 years ago, and our neighbor, she's a esthetician. Yeah,
Mhm.
esthetician. I can never say that word. I remember her like looking at my face, and I asked her, and she's like, "Oh, girl, you got something going on." And I was like, "Yeah." And I tied it back to birth control. I was like, I came off of birth control, and what people don't realize is when you're on birth control, it can cause so many different things like gut imbalances. Nutrient deficiencies is a huge one, especially when you're on like the combo pill. Nutrient deficiencies when you're on birth control, like that's a huge one. Acne, huge, like huge.
Mhm.
PCOS is a big one. They now classify post birth control syndrome a PCOS now, and that's from,
Oh,
yes, and it's not really PCOS, like from a classification standpoint, but that's what they're calling it because they don't know
interesting.
what else to call this syndrome of coming off of birth control. So they
See, I
call
wish I
it.
would have been working with you when I came off
Yeah.
because, like,
I wish I was working with me when I came off.
so, because like I came off at 27, we checked my hormones by 30, they still
Yeah.
were zero. So 3 years had passed. I still had no hormones. Like my hormones did not rebound. They just did not start back. So then I had to start on bioidentical hormones
Yeah.
at 32. And I'm like,
Yes.
number one, these are expensive. Number two, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life, but I don't really have an option.
Yeah, it's a lot, but yeah, it's a sin because like the girls that went on it at 15, like if you would have told me this, I maybe like I don't know when I was 15, I'd probably be like, I'll worry about it later. But like I don't know what my stand. Like I just wish we were a little bit more open. And I do have women that are still on birth control, like in their late 20s, early 30s, and we're at a point where I'm like, hey, I want to open the conversation. I am never ever going to tell somebody what to do,
Right.
but it's important to understand coming off isn't just like an on-off switch for some people. For some people it is. Like for some people they can be like, if the goal is to get pregnant someday. I've seen people forget to take their pill one day and get pregnant, and like it does happen, but it doesn't happen to everybody.
Right. And that
Yeah.
was the theory that I was going to have. Have you noticed like our generation was put
Mhm.
on birth control very early age? I'm
Yeah.
not saying the generation before us wasn't. I think it was less common though.
Yeah.
And then how high the infertility rate is. And I'm thinking
Yes.
there is some kind of combination of
Yeah.
birth control, we no longer have the hormones, we're not
Yeah.
ovulating, and the
Yes.
infertility journey. And then
100%.
I tried to talk to someone about this, and they were like, no, I don't think so. They were like, I think it's just that people are talking about their infertility journey now. And I was like, maybe, but it's
It
a
could
lot
be a
of
mix.
people.
Honestly, it could be a mix because it is a touchy topic. Like it really is a touchy topic. And I do think more people are speaking out about it, absolutely, especially because now there's platforms like Instagram, TikTok. Like I know I follow plenty of people in the infertility space. I do follow one girl in particular right now, and I've been following her pretty closely since she started this whole journey. She has been trying for 4 years and cannot get pregnant. She got pregnant once, had a miscarriage, and then got diagnosed with like 4 years of unexplained infertility. She's now working with a holistic doctor, and they started with her gut. And I was like, I wish you explored that 4 years ago. I wish somebody told you to explore that 4 years ago. Because
And
a
it's,
lot of things with infertility can be linked to the gut, you
I was about
know?
to say, is that because the hormones are start in the gut?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It can be from so many different things. But again, like what you said with like birth control, most of these women, not all, like not all. And again, like this is just like on forums that I'm on. I'm on so many
Yeah.
different forums, but like most do start with like I was on birth control for X amount of years. Then I came off and I couldn't get pregnant, or I did get pregnant and I lost the pregnancy and like whatever it may be. But yeah, like so many things can be linked to birth control, especially with like thyroid. Like thyroid's a big one, because it does disrupt your thyroid function. And we weren't told that, you know. It can definitely intrude with like future fertility. And yeah, at the end of the day, it's like shutting off your hormone function. So if you're just like expecting to come off of this and then just like flip the switch on, we don't know. And it's hard when I have clients, especially like age does not like matter. Like people are going to say like, oh, like once you're in your like early 40s or like whatever, like it all depends on your hormones, like where you stand hormonally. But when I have women that have been on birth control forever, it's like a touchy combo when I'm like, let's just, when you want to eventually explore that option, I would say more times the better to prep your body. Like it's not just going to be like a on off, like I want to
Right.
be pregnant 3 months, let's come off. Like I say at least 6 months to a year. When I say 6 months, like I'm really meaning like a year to a year and a half, even like 2 years, because you
Hmm.
don't know, you know. And now there's so many different ways to track, and there's always been ways to track, but I feel like more like we've kind of talked about, people are talking about it. There's so many ways that we can, good ways to track our fertility without the birth control. I like exploring those options,
Yeah,
especially in a
let's talk about that because
yeah.
I do have a friend that's just turned 40 that is still
Yeah.
on birth control and she says that it's because she does not want a period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and
Yeah.
again, like that's the tough part because they're annoying. Don't get me wrong. Like I
Yeah.
get it. You're bleeding, but and I know that this was a question. You sent me a little list of questions that you wanted to talk about when we were on this podcast. Um, there are reasons why people get, like, if somebody doesn't want a period, that tells me that when they had a period, it was probably super painful.
Right.
So when it comes to like super painful periods, I know you had a question of like, is it normal to have symptoms?
Yeah. Like PMS symptoms.
It totally depends to what extent. Like, I'm not going to tell you you're never going to have a cramp again. And you're never going to get like irritable and you're not going to have like mood swings. Like, but it depends on the extent. If you are somebody that like can't make it to the gym, you're calling out of work, which I have clients that are like that.
Yeah.
Um, that's a different story, like totally different story. But having like some mild symptoms, like that's I hate using the word normal, and I know that you know what I mean when I say
Mm-hmm.
that. There's a very fine line when it comes to normal. Like, is it normal or is it just common? Um, and I feel like we've normalized super painful periods. But if you come to me and you have like super painful periods, like you're calling out of work, you're crippled, you're down bad, you're not going to the gym, there's usually some things that we're going to start to look at. Like it usually is telling me a couple, it can tell me one of a couple of different things. But it's usually that there's like an estrogen imbalance. It could be a progesterone imbalance. It could be a blood sugar imbalance. It could be a water imbalance. It could be a gut imbalance. I do see it a lot with like estrogen and progesterone imbalances and gut imbalances.
That makes
So
sense though. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, it
yeah,
makes total sense. Yeah.
yeah. So if you're like down bad, crippled with PMS symptoms, something deeper is going on. And usually that tells me that there's a deeper level of inflammation in the body. And that comes back to like hormones or like gut.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but yeah, inflammation's a big culprit for a lot of different things. And people go on birth control and they just like, they think it's going to solve all their issues, but it's slapping a band-aid over another issue. And what a lot of people don't understand, when they're on the birth control and then they come off, those symptoms are going to come right back and they
Right.
make it back worse.
Right.
It's not that you're like fixing it, you're not healing it, you're not getting to the root cause of it. You're just putting it on pause for a little bit.
Right. Now, I know some people also want to go on birth control so they don't have a period because they might have a period that's like 7 to 14 days.
Yeah.
Can you touch? I know I skipped over that question. Can you
No, no,
touch
you're good.
a bit? Like I know
Yeah.
there's no normal quote unquote length of cycle, but what's an average length of cycle and what's
Yeah.
not normal?
There's actually definitely a normal length. Like,
Okay.
so I would consider anything short less than 22 days. Some people would even say like 25 days, but like I'll lean on the side of 22. Some people do just have like shorter periods. And it longs can be considered anything like 35 plus days. So like 22 to 35. And that's why we kind of came to the conclusion that like 28 days. So when you're on like birth control, it's usually like based on a 28-day cycle
Okay.
pack. Um, but yeah, 22 to 35 days, that's kind of where we want to be. If it's anything longer, anything shorter, like we do want to start exploring, like, okay, is she ovulating? And that can be, we can start tracking BBT. And I know that you're somebody that does track BBT with your Oura ring, which is awesome. That's like a big indicator. Cervical fluid can be a really good indicator too, because this can tell us like if we're nearing the fertile zone. And this kind of goes hand in hand with like how do we track our ovulation, you know? So BBT is a good one, making sure that your temperature is rising. If we do get a temperature rise of 0.5 to 1 degree Fahrenheit for 3+ days, that can confirm that you're ovulating, which is great. Cervical fluid, if you're getting it and it's like, again, that like clear and stretchy, that's like a really good sign as well. But yeah, like those are the things that we're really going to be looking at, especially if somebody has like an abnormal cycle, because we want to shorten that
Okay.
cycle, especially if it's a little bit longer. But usually when somebody has a longer cycle or shorter cycle, that comes back to like maybe it's a progesterone thing, maybe it's an estrogen thing, maybe it's a water imbalance, like maybe it's a gut imbalance, blood sugar. Like these are all things that we can start like working on, and these are things that we can start working on with nutrition.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so when it comes to birth control, like I know we talked about like mostly like oral contraceptive, like the pills. Talk about some other birth controls that if maybe I know. So you talked about IUDs, oral
Yeah.
contraception, and then talk about some others and that the
Yep.
natural that you prefer, which you talked to me about and I started doing while I was working with you.
Yeah. So when it comes to like birth control, like actually like putting something into your body, like we have the mini pill. It's usually a combination pill. And that's going to be usually a combination of the estrogen and progesterone. So again, this is synthetic hormones. Sometimes it might just be progesterone. Um, but usually it's going to be like a combo pill. And that's why they call it like a combo mini pill. Hormonal IUD, this is going to be progesterone based. So it's just producing the progesterone for
Hmm.
you. So you're not producing progesterone by yourself. But this sometimes hormonal IUDs, since it's just progesterone based, it's sometimes, and not everybody's the same. No two women are the same, can allow for ovulation to still be happening. So some people that are on the hormonal IUD, it can allow ovulation to still be happening, but that doesn't mean that the egg is going to be able to hospitalize. That's the word I'm trying to use, when it comes to getting pregnant. So if you're ovulating, it doesn't mean that you're always going to be able to get pregnant, especially while on something like a hormonal IUD, because the egg just can't stay, it can't get fertilized, if
Okay.
that makes sense in the simplest terms. But hormonal IUDs can sometimes allow for ovulation and hormonal fluctuation in most, but not everybody. I do have clients that are on the hormonal IUD, and like some, it's such a touchy concept, because I have like one in particular where we're like, she wants to understand if she's ovulating. And I'm like, we could try to get you comfortable with tracking BBT, but since you're on something that's producing the progesterone, your temperature is going to be super wonky, like
Right.
it's not going to be like, we can't really balance hormones number one, or like track ovulation number two when you're on something that's hormonal, because you're getting synthetic hormones. It's not the hormones that you're producing. The IUD hasn't been shown to make you like super nutrient deficient. And I'm not saying like this is one, like if you're going to go on one, go on this one. I'm not for, in this point of my life, at least I'm not for, unless like there was, I don't know, we can have that conversation later,
Well,
but
I read the Period Repair Manual. I don't know if you've
yeah,
ever read that book. And
I have
she
it. I haven't read it yet, but I
It's
do have
really good.
it
You'll
on
love
I'm
it.
zooming over
And
there. So
she
just go
does
there.
say like if you're going to pick a birth
Yeah.
control, she does recommend IUDs over
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
pills.
And
Yeah.
that can lead us into the copper IUD
Yeah.
conversation, because people are like, oh, it's not hormonal, but it's freaking copper.
You can get toxic.
Yeah. And there's, yeah, 100%. I was actually listening to a girl. We worked with the same mentor. She posted yesterday. She used to take a copper IUD, and she's like, I have a theory. And it was like, I get all like, I forget what she was saying, but she was saying that she gets like, um, what was she saying? I
I had a
forget.
friend that actually got copper toxicity from her
Yeah.
IUD.
That's where she was going with it. She
Hmm.
was like, I get like really flaky skin and like blah, blah, blah. And like, I was like, yeah, like I'm sure you're putting like, she's like, now she's not like, she's a huge advocate of like
And my
natural.
I think my sister, I don't know. I think my sister had a copper IUD and she talked about how like she still had horrible, horrible periods
Yeah.
and all this other stuff. And I was just like, I thought it was supposed to stop that. And she was like, no, it's a copper one because I was trying to
Yeah.
go with
Yeah.
no hormones.
Yes.
And I was
And
just like, oh my God.
people see it as an option because there's no change in hormones, the ovulation, or ovulation, but like some do report changes in like their cycle length or like their blood volume or like PMS symptoms. But again, like I don't know what's better putting into your body, synthetic hormones or copper. Like I really don't
Toss up.
know.
Toss up
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
Pick your poison.
yeah, exactly. And like, yeah, the copper toxicity is totally a thing. Um,
And then there's the
drink.
natural cycles, the way, what is it? Is it Planned Parenthood? What is it actually called? What is for the natural cycles? I know Natural Cycles is an app, but like when you're doing it naturally, is it called?
Oh, the fertility awareness method, the FAM
Yeah. Okay.
method. Yeah.
I was, what is it called?
Which
Planned Parenthood?
I love that. I do love that. That is also a thing.
But people don't know
Um,
about the fertility
no.
awareness
And I have
model.
girlfriends that have like sworn by that and like have used that to get pregnant. And like I'm somebody that is like, yeah, like I want to use
If you
natural.
do it correctly, isn't it
Yeah,
98.1%?
yeah, 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 yeah. Like, yeah. So like the FAM method's going to include your BBT, your cervical mucus, and then using a calendar. And when I say a calendar, this is where it gets iffy. And I talked about this in my story this morning. A lot of people come to me like before we get into like the nitty gritty of like, maybe we can just like track BBT or something like that. Like I've actually found that more women are like willing to track the BBT than not. Like I feel like I thought when I would present this to some clients, they'd be like, no. And like some people have been like, oh, I'm never gonna freaking do that.
Yeah.
Uh, but it actually has gone more well than I thought, weller than I thought. But when it comes to like an app, like I remember before I started using like natural cycles, I just used my Apple Health Kit, like whatever it was. And I used to get a message like predicted ovulation or like you're going to start your period in 2 days. And I'd be like, oh, hell yeah, like, and like, I just kind of trusted that,
Yeah.
and I know a lot of women, like I have some girlfriends that trust their apps too. They're like, oh, like whether they use, there's so many apps out there. There's like, I hear Flow a lot. I
Yeah.
hear, I know people use the Apple one a lot. People are turning to natural cycles. You do have to pay for it. But if you're listening to this, it's a type of birth control. So your insurance is going to reimburse you. You can do that right on their website. There's like
And
a,
I will say the Natural Cycles app, because you recommended that to me when I
I
bought my
love it.
Aura Ring, it is way more accurate because I used to use Flow.
Yes,
Way more like when it
I've
says your
found it.
period is coming tomorrow, your period is coming tomorrow.
I have found it to be super accurate. And I do think it's because we track BBT with it. And like,
Yeah.
again, like going back to like things being 98% accurate, it's your freaking temperature, like, um, I love natural cycles. Like I'm a huge advocate. And again, like I'm in so many different groups now and I'm always like natural cycles, natural cycles, natural cycles.
Natural
And like
Cycles
somebody,
sponsor Carrie.
yeah, like I love it. Like I really do. Cause I found it to be accurate. I found it to work. And yeah, like I do love it. But when it comes to the temperature tracking, some women are open to it, some women aren't, but most apps these days do have a spot for you to track your BBT. Like I think Flow, I know I've never used Flow. I do have a couple clients that use Flow. I've seen like screenshots and stuff of it. I believe there is a place to
That
put,
must be in the pro version because I
yeah,
have the free
maybe.
version. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I know Premom. I use Premom too, but again, like I really don't even use it anymore because I really just liked being able to scan my LH strips and like we can talk about LH strips in just a second. I liked being able to scan my LH strips and it told me my levels. I haven't found any other app that was able to do that. Where Natural Cycles does have an option to do your LH strips, but it didn't test like levels. It was kind of just pass fail, like negative
Yeah.
or like, and I found that like to be a little wonky depending on the brand. I'm pretty good with like eyeing it. Like if it's like super dark, I know like, okay, my ovulation's kind of near. Um, but when it comes to I just lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
You were talking about LH strips in the Natural Cycles app.
Natural cycles, flow. I was saying something about flow. See, this is
You were
a
saying with
kind of,
Flow, you could possibly put your basal body temperature in
oh
there.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a couple of there's a bunch of different apps. I've found natural cycles to be the best in my opinion. The people like you have told me that you find it the most accurate. I've used it side by side with other apps. This is where I was going with it. Premom. I was using Premom for a little while to help with my LH strips, but still I found it to be a little bit off compared to my natural cycles. I found my natural cycles to be like spot on.
And something
Which
else with
is
natural
cool.
cycles that you told me about, like tracking your symptoms, which I'm really bad about. Like all the apps have like symptoms, but the thing about the
Yes.
natural cycles is you can turn your phone sideways and look
Yes.
at a
Like a
graph,
graph.
and it'll tell you like when you're having the same symptoms, like if it's at the same time each month.
Correct. Yeah. And you can use like emojis. And I love a good emoji, you know? So it's like, yeah, like if you're bloated, if you're constipated, like it's so nice. And like, yes, if you turn your phone sideways, it's cool because it draws a nice little graph for you. But BBT is like, it's super cool. And essentially what you're looking for with BBT, you need to get data first. Like I do have some clients that want it to work like right away. And I'm like, BBT, you're looking for patterns. So you want more data to go off of. Like, it's not going to be like, I mean, never say never, but like if you're using it to get pregnant, we're going to want to be doing it for like multiple months to kind of see like, okay, number one, we want you to get familiar with taking your temperature. Number two, we want to see what kind of patterns you have because everyone's going to have a different like basal body temp pattern for the most part. But what you're looking for with BBT is arise after ovulation. So it's not going to tell you before ovulation, like you're not going to know before you ovulate, but some people do see a slight dip in their temperature before they ovulate, before they see a rise. I find that in myself. And again, like this comes back to seeing patterns.
Hmm.
I've heard that to be true for a lot. I don't know if you've noticed that, like if you see a slight dip
don't
before you see
I
the
need to be
rise.
better at paying attention. I'll be honest.
Yeah.
I'm not like in a
Yeah.
relationship right now, so I'm not
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah. And I
track all
understand.
that. But it's funny because over Christmas, it actually told me that my temperature was higher than normal during that part of my month, and then I got
Yeah.
sick. So it like
Okay.
predicted that I
Yeah.
was about to get sick.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
It,
That's, it's
it
great.
said it said in there, it said your temperature is higher than your usual. We're
Yeah.
going to discard this.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's why I like natural cycles because here's the thing with BBT. A lot goes into it. If you are somebody that is like not the best with sleep, like if you, there's a lot that goes into the BBT conversation because essentially what you want to be doing is taking the temperature around the same time every day before you get up and move around. So like so when you're like laying in bed, the alarm clock goes off, you're rolling over and you're either like if you're taking it with like a temperature thermometer, for us it's on our Aura ring, which is really cool. It's kind of like painless for us. Some would say like the thermometer is going to be more accurate than something like a wearable device. I have found because like even when I started with my Aura ring, I was doing both at the same time to kind of compare them, and they were like very much the same. But some people would say like the most reliable way is going to be through the mouth, which I totally get. But again, like
But for me,
getting
like I'm
some,
someone who
yeah,
gets up at a different time every single day. So
yeah,
to set
yeah.
my
So it's
time on
hard.
my Aura ring at
Yeah,
like 3 a.m. Before
yeah,
because sometimes I'm up at 4, sometimes I'm up
yeah.
at 5.
Yeah, it's hard. Essentially with BBT, you want to be taking temperature around the same time about every day. You want to be looking for 3+ hours of sleep. I do work with overnight nurses that like tracking BBT. I have one in particular where we wanted to confirm her ovulation, and we were able to confirm her ovulation through tracking BBT, which is awesome. But she was an overnight nurse, and like her sleep's super wonky. But it is like through the research that I found, it's just if you're sleeping for 3+ hours, BBT can be reliable. But a lot goes into it. Like if you're sick, if you're hungover, and that's why you see in the top of natural cycles, if you're sick or you're hungover, that's an option, and it's going to cross it out for the day and take that out because your temperature is going to be a little bit higher when you're sick and when you're hungover. But yeah, with the BBT, what you're looking for is the rise to confirm ovulation, and that's going to stay up for 3+ days. Ideally, it's going to stay up through your mid to late luteal phase. And then if you're going to get your period, if you're not pregnant, you're going to start seeing it come back down.
Okay. And you mentioned LH strips. Like where would that fall into figuring out ovulation?
Yeah. So LH strips. I like LH strips for visual. Like I like being able to visually see like, okay, they're getting darker. Would I say like you should just rely on the LH strips? No, because it's not confirming that ovulation is actually happening. The only thing that LH is actually confirming is that your luteinizing hormone, which we need for ovulation, is rising. But it's not confirming that you're actually ovulating. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Like
because you
you
can have
can
an elevated LH but no
correct
ovulation.
like people with PCOS, they can
Mhm.
see multiple LH peaks throughout the week, some or throughout the month, some of them. When you have PCOS, you have super wonky cycles. Not everybody, like it's not always textbook, but what I see is some people get multiple peaks in their LH. That doesn't mean they're ovulating multiple times throughout the month. You're usually
Right.
ovulating once. No, you're only ovulating once in a cycle. So what's going to confirm that is the BBT. Or if you're like going to the doctor and you're going to get your progesterone tested, but like most people aren't doing that when you're getting your progesterone tested, you got to get it tested before you ovulate and after you ovulate, and you want to see a rise in progesterone because that's going to confirm
Okay.
ovulation too. But the best way that we can do that is the BBT. And why your temperature rises is because the progesterone's rising. So
No,
that's
well, since
the
you
thing.
mentioned testing, so
Yeah,
like I know people are not going to go to the doctor every time they're trying to figure out their
yeah,
ovulation, but if you're
yeah,
trying to figure out your hormones,
correct.
what do you recommend testing wise? Because I know there's serum blood, which means blood work. There's
Yeah,
the Dutch testing, which is a urine test, and then there's
yeah.
salivary, right?
Yeah. So yeah, there's a couple of different ones. If you're just going to a basic like doctor, if you want to get like it depends, like it totally depends. And
Because
this
your
is where it's
insurance is only going to pay for blood work.
correct. And it
Right.
sucks because like in the fertility world, they're usually not testing this stuff until you've been trying for a freaking year. And that's a long time for a lot of people,
Hmm.
especially if it's a freaking hormone thing. And we could have been working on this. Yeah, like something that I see with a lot of women who can't continue out pregnancies when it comes to like miscarriages is progesterone being a little bit lower. And I know people who've had multiple miscarriages at this point, and then they get to their like third or fourth, and they're like, "Oh, we're going to put you on progesterone," and then they're able to have a healthy pregnancy. And it, like, I don't know about you, that sucks. If it's just progesterone, and that's not to say that everybody is it's a progesterone issue, but for a lot it is, and that
Right.
sucks.
And why should a woman have to go through that much emotional
Correct.
distress to wait a
Yeah.
year to figure
Yeah.
out it was just your progesterone?
Yes. It's like it's a super shitty. Like it's so shitty. Joanna knows, but I lost a pregnancy at 20 and a half weeks earlier this year, and getting testing done. I was lucky enough to work with people who I was able to get testing done. It wasn't a progesterone issue, it was actually a chromosome issue. And we had all the necessary testing that was done, but still like it's just the only answer is like, oh, it's not going to happen again. And it's like, well, it happened once, like
Right.
that's scary.
Right.
And yeah, it's hard. It's so tough. And I've met so many like great women through this whole experience. But when it comes to a lot of the times, like when I'm in these forums, progesterone's like, I'm talking about progesterone to these women every day. And I'm like, oh my God. And they're like, why is it so hard to get this tested? And like, my doctor's not concerned. My progesterone's at like 5. And I'm like, honey, like that's low. Like,
Yep.
you know, um,
Like
and
mine
it's
was like, and that's something. So I've never been a girl that's been like, oh
yeah,
my God, I'm dying to have children. I've had
yeah,
so many nieces and nephews. Like my first
yeah,
nephew was born when I was 10 years old. So I
yeah,
feel like I've kind of through my sisters and brothers, I've already done that. So I don't
yeah,
feel like I've ever missed out on anything or wanted that.
yeah,
But when I was told at 30, like, oh, by the way, you have no hormones. So if you're trying to get pregnant, it's just
ugh,
not going to happen. Like, then I was sad. And then I was like, why am I
yeah,
sad? I never wanted children. But now
yeah,
that I've been told that I cannot because it
yeah,
was no longer my choice, I then
yeah.
got sad about it.
And something that I do encourage women that have heard, because like I've heard this like multiple times from multiple women now, is like they've been told that they're never going to be able to get
And
pregnant.
then they go get pregnant.
And then they go get pregnant. And it's just do not trust that only
Right.
opinion, like
Right.
I'm a conspiracy theorist, but like really like get multiple opinions. Again, like a lot of the times, and I'm not saying this for everybody because I hate believe me, I hate it when people are like, oh, just like relax and you'll get pregnant. Like that's not what I'm saying. But a lot of things can be helped through like lifestyle and diet and like checking some of these markers. And when it comes to like markers, like right off the bat, like simple blood work can be done. Like I would recommend, I mean, again, this is going to be really hard for your doctor to test unless they have a reason to test it. But sometimes like it depends. It totally depends. And sometimes more OBs are open to testing
Hmm.
what you want tested. I've found since I went through what I went through earlier this year, my doctor's been open to testing what I want, where I thought I would have to jump through hoops, but like they've been okay with testing things. But again, like I know plenty of people in this space where it's not until like the third or fourth time where they're really looking into this stuff. But progesterone's a good one to look at. You want to test it at the right time of the month. You want to test it post ovulation. It's depending on where your cycle is. It's usually going to be between days 18 to 21 for most women. That's when it's going to be the highest, and that's when you want to test it. So it's really like a lot of the times people are testing hormones at the wrong time. So you want to make sure
Hmm.
you're testing at the right time. Progesterone's are a good one. Your FSH, your follicle stimulating hormone, that's another really good one to look at. And then your LH, because your luteinizing hormone, like all of these have so much to do with your ovulation and having a healthy pregnancy. So those are things that you can look at. But again, like they're not happening on normal blood work. Like I wish we could go to the doctor and be like, hey, like I'm in a relationship. We want to have kids someday. Can we start looking at this? They're going to be like, oh no, you're healthy, you work out, you're going to be
Yeah,
fine.
right. Now, which of the three do you recommend testing wise? Do you recommend serum, Dutch testing, or salivary better?
It's like such a hard conversation. Like I feel like so many practitioners, I'm not a practitioner, but so many practitioners will have their favorites. Like I feel like I hear the saliva is very, very trustworthy. And then the Dutch test is very,
Yeah.
very trustworthy as well.
I think
But
it all
yeah,
depends on what you're looking for, too.
totally depends what you're looking for. It totally depends on what you're like, who you're working with too, because some people are going to specialize in reading Dutch tests and some people are going to specialize in reading like saliva tests. So, like it can be so different depending on like
Right.
who you're working with and what they recommend. And like sometimes like different tests can tell you different things. So it's all about timing. Like you want to be timing this right. And I know that you're pretty familiar with doing like these tests and you know that it kind of
Yeah.
does on the timing.
I will
Uh,
say I've had all three done.
yeah.
Obviously, the blood work is the easiest because you just show up
Mhm.
during the days, the 18 to
Mhm.
21 days. The
Yep.
Dutch test, I absolutely hated because I like to drink a lot of water, and this
Yeah.
test limits your water throughout the day. And I thought I was dying because I couldn't have
Yeah.
water.
Which is
And
crazy. Like I haven't done one. I do want to do one. I've seen plenty of them and like I've done courses where we're like reading them. I think they're super interesting. Um, like I was pregnant for a while, so like I wasn't able to do them when I was like super interested in doing them. Blood work is super easy, absolutely. And it's something that we can like go do out of pocket. Like we can do all of this stuff out of
yeah,
pocket. Usually, like if you're doing like a Dutch test or something like that, you're working with somebody.
it's the cheapest though.
Yeah, it's the cheapest way to go, whether you're doing it out of pocket or whether you're paying for insurance. Cause like now you can literally go on like labcorp.com and pay for your own blood work, which is like
Hmm.
a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can go and get your own blood work. And there's plenty of panels out there that are good. That's usually where I'll start because this is the most cost effective if I need to. Like I'm not like a super, like you know me, I'm not like a super like happy testing coach. Like I do rely on like test, don't guess, absolutely. But for me, I have a lot of clients that come in and there's things that we have to work on before we're like running labs, like there's
Right.
basic things that we need to work on. Like I need to make sure that you're like eating enough, we're exercising, you're eating enough protein, like we're going to the bathroom daily. Like there's basic interventions that we can do. There's some people that come into coaching where I'm like, yeah, if we ran blood work right now, we're probably going to find some red flags. But if we take 3 to 6 months, we probably bring some of those markers down, just like
Yeah,
by
I
doing
agree.
basics. Yeah.
So let's kind of talk a little bit about cycle syncing because I know that's like the
Yeah.
big phase right now. So
Yeah.
what is it and how do you cycle sync with food and
Yeah. So when it
workouts?
comes to workouts, like I'm going to keep this very easy when it comes to workouts and cycle syncing, because this is like all the phase. And like when we talk about cycle syncing, this is essentially like changing what you're doing throughout the month to match your energy. So going back to the beginning of the conversation when we were talking about like your ovulation, and again, like when we talked about ovulation, we said like your mood's probably going to be a little bit lower. And then when you step into follicular, you're getting a little bit more energy. When you're ovulating, you're feeling a little bit more stronger. When you're in the luteal phase, you're kind of feeling like crap again. So when we talk about cycle syncing, that's syncing your workouts to how you're feeling. I'm not somebody that's going to go ahead and like, I'm sure you can piece together why, and we can talk about it. I'm not somebody that's going to go ahead and change completely what I'm doing
I'm
for
not either.
exercise throughout the month.
I'm
Like I'm not
not.
going to be doing yoga 1 month, weightlifting or yoga 1 week, weightlifting 1 week. What else?
No. I'm just
Cycling,
going to
like
lower my weights.
correct. And that's where I'm going with this conversation is I rather you pick a form of exercise that you enjoy. Hopefully it's weightlifting because there's just like, it's not because I like weightlifting, but it's the reasons why I like weightlifting. Like having more muscle mass is going to help with so many different freaking things. And really like we know so many women come to us and what they need to be doing is lifting weights to get to the physique that they want when it comes to having more muscle mass and less fat mass. Yeah, that's my weightlifting spiel. But when it comes to like cycle syncing workouts, if we're weightlifting, we know that the overall goal is to put muscle mass over time. If you're constantly changing what you're doing every single week, every single month, we're never going to be progressing anywhere. So I'm on the side of let's just lower the intensity and up the intensity throughout the month. So what that could look like is when you're like in your luteal phase, mid to late luteal phase, or like even like start of your period, maybe you're going to go a little bit lower on intensity. Like this is going to be the time for PRs. This isn't going to be the time to like go crazy in the gym. But when you step into that follicular phase, and especially ovulation, that's when you're like, all right, I can step up the intensity a little bit. You're going to be feeling good. You are going to be putting up PRs in the gym. So that's how I would gauge like cycle syncing when it comes to workouts. Um, but yeah, like when it comes to if you're somebody that's like into running, maybe like you're going to be doing, I don't know if you can like schedule your marathons, but maybe like your marathon's going to be like when you're ovulating or like when you're like in that when you're in your like follicular phase. But yeah, like that's the extent that I'm going to take it. And like when I work with clients, we're predominantly weightlifting. So we kind of just explore like, okay, it makes sense if we're like backing down a little bit on weights. But yeah, like I'm not at the point yet where I'm like cycle syncing people's workouts.
That just
But
looks stressful
yes,
AF.
I want to, yeah,
When
especially
you're
like,
changing something every weekend, then you have to
correct.
remember what
Yeah.
phase am I in? What workouts am
Yeah.
I doing this week?
Yeah.
When I like kind of went down that TikTok rabbit hole, I was just like,
It's a lot.
this is a lot.
Yeah. And it's crazy. It's funny that you say that because like I've recently taken a turn over the last like, I don't know, what would you say, 6 months to a year of like talking about this kind of stuff. In the last like 9 months in particular, I would say. So yeah, like one of the biggest questions has been like, do I need to be cycle syncing? And I'm like, this is the shit you guys are worried about. Like, just
Yeah.
go to the gym. Like, that's all I want you to do. And like, it's so overwhelming because you just like hear all these things and makes you do nothing. And you're like,
Right.
well, I don't know if I need to be cycle syncing. I don't know if I need to be doing this. And it's like, just pick one form of exercise that you like. Hopefully it's weightlifting. I'm probably going to sell you on the weightlifting thing if you're not weightlifting, and stick with that and then adjust your weights accordingly. Like that's how I am.
And then I did have one more question. And this was from someone on Instagram that asked it,
Yeah.
which there was no way I could like tie it into the conversation from the other questions because
Oh no,
it's
you're
just
good.
completely separate. But someone, specifically a man, asked, "How can men?"
Love
Which I
that.
was very. It was one of my friends, and I was like, "You're just always so supportive of the
I
podcast." And
love this.
he was like, "No, I really am going to listen because I really need to know this stuff."
Hopefully I
And
know the answer. I'm getting nervous.
he just wants to know how can men support women
Yeah.
knowing like through their cycle, through the month, how can men
Yeah.
support women?
Honestly, like just listening, really. Like I think that's like the best answer. Like don't overcomplicate it. Don't make us feel crazy. Like,
Right,
I think
right,
the worst thing you could say is like, oh, you're just so crazy, or like, oh, you're so hormonal, or like whatever it is. Uh,
right.
but listening is good. And again, like kind of learning the phases. Like if you could learn your woman's cycle, like where she is, it's gonna help you, number
You'll
one.
be
Like,
like, oh, this makes so much
and then
sense.
it makes sense. Like, yeah, when to like stay away a little bit, and then where like she may be
When
feeling
to
a little
not
bit
don't
better.
poke the bear at this week.
Yes, a
Like she's
hundred,
not going to be able to handle it this week.
100%. And I think that's a good idea. Like if you want to start like a calendar on the fridge, like I think that's a good idea. I wish you could like invite people to your natural cycles and like
Oh,
show them where you
that would
are.
be a good idea.
That would be a great. Well,
I
in
think you might be able to. Isn't there a partner app?
I don't know. We have to look into that.
Yeah,
I know.
we'll have to
Yeah,
look into
that would
that. I
be
think there
cool. But
is.
honestly, just support and just like not making like backhanded comments is a good one. But that's a great question. Like I support that fully. And
Yeah.
two, like when we get a little bit hungrier, like right before our period, don't make us feel bad about it. That's another good one.
I was trying to look on my natural cycles app real quick to see if there was like a like setting where you could like add someone real quick. Oh, there is partner view.
Oh, that's pretty
So
cool.
you go to settings and there's a partner view and you can enable it for your partner to view it.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
That's so funny. I had a girlfriend that just texted me and said, "Can you send me an app to start tracking my periods?" Her ears are ringing.
So where can everyone find you? Like, let's say they just want to work with you nutrition wise, fitness
Yeah.
wise, or even if they're like having hormone
Yep.
issues and they want to come like work with you to figure out
Yeah.
the hormones, get off birth control, all the things.
Yeah, the best place to find me is Instagram. Like that's where I'm the most active. That's where I spend a lot of my time, which is _@ Coach Keri, and that's KER. Slide in my DMs. I do have my application in my bio, but like feel free to just start a conversation. In the month of July, you didn't hear from me. I'm going to be offering a month free to any new joins. I'm going to be taking like hopefully like 3 to 5 new joins. So jump depending when this podcast comes out. You're usually pretty quick with your podcast.
Yeah, it should
Uh,
be out the next couple weeks. It'll probably be out at the
Sweet.
end of June or very beginning of July.
Sweet. Yeah. So definitely take advantage of that. You'll hear me start talking about that in July. And I like this timeline because it's for 6 month contracts, and that leads us to January. Like that's
Yeah.
crazy. we're halfway through the year. I was writing an email up today for this offer, and I'm like, holy shit, we're like halfway through the year. And like I know so
No.
many women, like we fought, and like I know you're not one of them, but like, and I was never one of them too, to like kind of base what I'm doing off of where it is in the year. Like right now, I
Yeah.
feel like so many people are like, oh, it's summer, I can't start anything new. And it's like we have 6 months to like kind of make you feel good by 2025. And if you want to feel like really good by next summer, like you should be starting now, and everybody's so different, but don't let time kind of
No,
summer
and
is
I'll
cool.
vouch for that. Like I love you so much as a coach and as a friend. Like you know what you're doing. Like I'm the strongest I probably ever have been. And
Are.
the first person to have ever gotten me to do a quote unquote bulking phase during
Yes.
the summer.
Yeah. And I think that's the important part to share is like, I think people are like, oh, I can't commit to a diet right now. And it's like,
I'm not.
you're
Well,
probably not ready for a
yeah.
diet. Most of us aren't ready for it. I don't want you to diet either. Like, I'm not going to diet you unless you're ready for a diet, but most people aren't ready to diet. So
I
like
think
summer
that
is a
people,
great time to start.
yeah, I think that people maybe have worked with other people in the past where they put them on this strict
Yes.
low calorie
Oh,
diet.
yes.
And guys, that is not what Carrie does. Like, trust me, she's trying to get you eating the most you can. I think what we're at 2,300 calories right now, me and
I'm
you.
trying to
So
make you eat more and you're
I'm
just
scared. I'm
I
scared. I'm
know.
scared.
We're gonna
But
get you there.
we'll get there. We'll get there.
But
But no,
Joanna was awesome.
thank you so much for doing this with me. You're so knowledgeable and time is precious. And I know you're so busy all the time. So thank you so much.
Of course. I appreciate it. I love chit-chatting and this has been fun.
Absolutely, guys. And her Instagram handle will be linked in the show notes. So you can just go to the show notes and easily click on that and start a conversation in the DMs with Carrie. So thank you guys. Until
Thanks,
next
guys.
time. Bye.